us on this edition of the Urban Debate. Viewers, as the entire country collectively fights the pandemic called coronavirus, as we begin to open up now and emerge from our lockdown, the cases increase. There is huge amount of pressure that's building up on our healthcare infrastructure. But as that happens, instead of working together, instead of collaborating, we are seeing some kind of confrontation between the governments and the hospitals. Incident after incident is emerging, where there is disagreement, where there are notices being sent, warnings being issued, penalties being levied on the hospitals. Now, obviously, this has left the medical fraternity extremely disturbed and unhappy. But the governments are saying some steps have to be taken as private hospitals begin to implement their own rules. They claim that the private hospitals are refraining from admitting COVID patients or are charging exorbitant prices. And some of that is true, as Mirror Now's investigative reports have also shown. So tonight I actually want to talk about this. The battle lines have been drawn, and there is a huge amount of confrontation taking place between various state governments as well as the private hospitals, which shouldn't be. We have to resolve these issues. Let me give you some examples of what's happened in many different parts and states of our country. For example, in Maharashtra, in Mumbai earlier, a few days ago, the Maharashtra government sent notices to 4 of the top hospitals, private hospitals, and the state said that the civic body also said that these hospitals were not following the rules and regulations during the pandemic, which is why they had been pulled up and asked for an explanation. In Pune, a notice was sent to a private hospital by the civic body. Again, the hospital was show cause because they allegedly turned away 2 patients. There has been a huge amount of fight also in Thane, where 2 hospitals were fined lakhs of rupees, and this is because they were admitting asymptomatic patients, which is against the policy that has been implemented here by the civic bodies and the states. These are some of the examples. You of course know, and we've repeatedly spoken about the incident in Delhi, where RML hospital was called out over testing data mismatch. Then there has been an FIR that has now been filed against Gangaram hospital over alleged violation of COVID rules. That's not all. In Tamil Nadu, there was an entire debate that took place over the kind of COVID packages that the private hospitals were coming out with and how they were overcharging the patients, forcing the government to come out with a cap on COVID treatment. And they have said that the fee cannot be more than what has now been laid out by the Tamil Nadu government. So there's a bit of a friction and confrontation taking place there as well. Not just that, viewers, if you talk about the treatment being meted out by private hospitals and the charges and the prices that they are actually quoting to the patients right now, even the top court has stepped into that. And the top court on June 6th questioned the central government. Why can't the hospitals cap their COVID treatment costs? If charitable hospitals can treat patients for free, can't the other hospitals at least match up to the Ayushman Bharat rates and ensure that that is where the treatment cost gets capped? Today again, the Delhi High Court has admitted a plea and issued a notice to the Aap government. The plea also again talks about denial of admission to patients in private hospitals, and this has become a big friction point between the Delhi government and the private hospitals. Just some of the examples, viewers, that we have here. Now, all of this is because there is an increasing burden on our healthcare infrastructure. We don't have enough PPE kits. We don't have enough doctors and nurses. We don't have enough beds, ventilators, and other resources which are needed. And there is some amount of now problem which is emerging in our big cities. How do we resolve this? Can we come to agreement? Can we ensure there is a national uniform policy maybe? Does the central government need to step in and say, no, these are the rules that everybody should follow? Or is it going to be left to each individual state and local authority? Some of the questions that I have in mind. Let's say good evening to our panelists who are joining us right now. Gopal Agarwal, National Spokesperson for the BJP. Dr. Raj Singh, Pulmonologist with Apollo Hospital in Chennai. Dr. Ambrish Satvik, Vascular and Endovascular Surgeon. In fact, he's with this Gangaram Hospital. Akshay Marathe, Spokesperson for the Aam Aadmi Party. And Dr. Sanjeev Mehta is a Pulmonologist with Leelavati Hospital. So let me actually first bring in a couple of our medical experts and doctors to ask them this question. The first big confrontation point, Dr. Mehta, has become the charges. And in reality, there are truly, some hospitals are truly charging some exorbitant rates for COVID. Now, we don't know whether the math really adds up, whether they just need extra money to bring in the PPE kits, or they just don't want too many of COVID patients because it hampers the entire operation. But is that really justified?
First of all, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for this program, because I think there's a lot of confusion out in the lay public, and let's help to clear it. Now, I have heard some charges being levied, which I do agree do not match up to the maths that I would look at. But I also want the lay people to know that when we talk of private hospitals, there are huge costs to the hospital. I was just thinking about this when I got the invitation for this program. Just for a ward of about 40 or 50 patients, occasionally pushed to 80, uh, nothing less than about 100 people would move in and out of that ward, could be 120. Now, if you look at that's in a 1 day 24-hour shift, and in a 24-hour shift, if about 100 people are moving, PPEs cost about 2,000 rupees. The ancillary staff costs so much more. We talk about a lot of money. 100 into 2,000, and we talk about 200,000, maybe more. So that's a cost of PPEs, not divided, and there's a fair number of costs. Over and above that, many of my patients are being given very expensive medicines, for example, tocilizumab, which is now kind of standard of care in a good hospital. And I was on a web conference yesterday with doctors from US. It has reduced mortality. So we're using it. Single dose is 50,000 rupees. So I'm not so sure that I can justify some of the costs I've heard, but I definitely feel that there is a much higher cost. Now, this could be borne partly by the hospital, partly by the patient, and probably partly by the government. So I that's my take on it. I think that there are additional costs. Remember that you're bringing in so much ancillary staff to support this. So I hope I made a point that costs are going to be more than normal, but probably not some of
Yes.
the numbers that I've heard earlier. Okay.
Yes, in fact, I just want to put out this example because there were recommendations, that were made by for example, the Chennai Doctors Association, and they made a recommendation to the government before the government capped the prices. In that breakup, there was obviously a separate cost that had been attached to the medical staff, and the fees for the doctors, and the money that will be spent on that. There was a separate cost which is attached to the additional safety equipment gear that will be required, and then there was a large chunk which ran into thousands and lakhs of rupees that they were suggesting. Now, Dr. Raj Singh, I'm not saying that the hospital should run into losses, but there has to be a line drawn somewhere. Are the governments then right in stepping in saying, no, you cannot charge more than this amount?
See, I think first of all, we are all agreed in this panel that nobody should really profit here from a national calamity. And I think Ranjiv and everyone else would agree to that. And having said that, the costs of medical care in a corporate hospital is fairly high, and somebody has to bear that cost. And first of all, we must see whom we are benefiting by capping the charges in a hospital such as that. Now, assuming, I'm not saying that this is the correct amount or not, but assuming that we are capping it at, let's say, 20,000 rupees a day, which is actually rock bottom compared to what Sanjeev was saying earlier. But even if we cap it at 20,000 rupees a day, and if an average patient takes 10 days to recover, it would be 2 lakhs. Now, what percentage of the Indian population can afford 2 lakhs for hospital care? I would say probably about 2%. And what is happening about the 98%? Now, why are we all debating about just this 2%? Now, there's a huge disparity of wealth in India, and I feel that maybe the top 1% of the population has about 4 times the wealth of the bottom 70%. Now, at some point, we should have a debate about what happens to the lower 99%. And having said that, one of the problems that we are facing today is really expose some of the gross lacunae in healthcare in our country. Now, hospital beds, as you mentioned earlier, is in great shortage. We have only zero point 0.5 per thousand population in India, whereas in most parts of the world, we have 2 to 13 hospital beds per thousand. And out of this zero point 0.5 bed, we find that most of the beds are in the private sector. Now, in Maharashtra, for instance, there are 3 times the amount of private hospital beds compared to public funded free hospital bed. Now, why is this happening? Now, I think in a poor country like India, we should really be providing 90% of the healthcare from public funding. Now, the reasons are because of our total underinvestment in healthcare since independence. We are spending only 1.3% of our GDP on healthcare, and this has produced great shortages everywhere. And these shortages are being filled in by private medicine. Now, I'm not saying that nobody in private medicine is profiteering throughout the year, but I think that should definitely be discontinued and should be discouraged and should be prevented. But I'm saying also that this COVID is just one of the many diseases that we have. Now, assuming that we are capping the charges for COVID, and we have a patient with COVID in a bed in the intensive care unit, and the next bed, we have a patient with congestive cardiac failure. Now, do we tell them, sorry, you're COVID negative and you have to pay full whack? Is that fair? I mean, it doesn't seem to be the right thing to do at all. So I think we are looking at bigger questions, and we have to look at the bigger situation to really understand what needs to be done now. And I think just blindly blaming private hospitals for charging too much is not the right thing to do.
Okay, Akshay Marathe, your party is also, and your government is also looking at, ways and possible means of ensuring that COVID treatment doesn't become unaffordable. What's the possible solution? There's obviously going to be a huge amount of backlash. You're already facing quite a bit of it from private hospitals.
At the outset, let me say that as a government, the Aam Aadmi Party fundamentally believes that during this coronavirus pandemic, no government, let alone the Delhi government, can actually fight this disease without the active and proactive support of the private hospitals of the city. And while I say this, I also must say that there are a few black sheep in the industry who are using this, I dare say, opportunity to actually make money from, the misery of patients. And there are several examples that your channel and several other channels have actually pointed out, that there are certain hospitals that are charging upfront 5 lakh rupees, 8 lakh rupees. And this is blatant black marketing of beds. It's profiteering of beds. So I think that there is a need to balance the needs and the costs of private hospitals versus the needs of society as a whole during this pandemic. And what the Delhi government has now done is twofold. Number one, what we've done is we've appointed Delhi government officials in all hospitals of Delhi, so that, first of all, no person who actually needs hospitalization is denied hospitalization. And number two, that every hospital has their own set of scheduled charges for every kind of treatment. So if a private hospital actually charges more than their scheduled rate sheet, then our Delhi government official will be there to prevent that from happening. And I think that is the key here, that on the one hand, private hospitals have to charge a bare minimum amount to be able to function profitably and be able to provide quality healthcare to their patients. But on the other hand, if a certain private hospital has on record given to the Delhi government in writing that for every patient they will charge X amount of money, tomorrow when the demand for those hospital beds actually goes up, they should not be allowed and must not be allowed to actually jack up their rates at that point. That is the critical part, and that's what Delhi government is focusing on. And the reason that we do not want to immediately start off with a price cap is because Delhi is actually a lot different from other parts of the country. We have a very strong tertiary healthcare system which is run by the government, whether it's the central government or the state government. If you look at the availability of corona beds in the city, more than 50% of all beds are actually in the government hospitals. So if a person who comes from a disadvantaged background requires hospitalization in Delhi, they do have the option of going to any of the Delhi government hospitals, including LNJP, GTB, Rajiv Gandhi, which are, by the way, taking in patients right now every day without looking at their ability to pay or any of that. So I think Delhi is a little bit different, but at the same time, we will not allow hospitals to profiteer and black market beds. And I have already told you what we are doing towards that.
Dr. Amrish Satvik, where do you stand on this entire debate? Some states have begun to move and cap prices. Maharashtra has already capped prices. In fact, they've even taken 80% of the beds of private hospitals in the city of Mumbai. Tamil Nadu has done so. This, you heard what the Aam Aadmi Party is saying. What is your view? Dr. Amrish Satvik, can you hear me? Okay, we're going to go across to him in just a bit, but let me also take this point to Gopal Agarwal. Mr. Gopal Agarwal, do you think there is a need for a central set of guidelines, a uniform policy? And I'm not talking in general times, but at least in times of a pandemic, we should be able to ensure that everybody is able to afford the treatment.
I think, Tanvi, there are 2, 3 points that if we mix, we will not able to clarify the debate. One thing is certain states have given land to private hospitals free of cost. Therefore, and under that agreement, they have to serve the people of that state. And I think they are required to do it, one point. So they should, at this particularly time, when there is such a big crisis, they should come further forward and help the people, and they cannot charge exorbitant rates, and many hospitals are definitely charging. They have to be checked because a rule of law is important, one thing. Second thing is, why this rate fixation is coming from some government, it is because these hospitals are not performing as they should in this crisis. And now certain hospitals are crying that this fixing of rate is bad. Who has fixed it? Because they were not going for the right approach, which is required at this considerate approach that should be required. So this is also an issue. The third point that I would like to make it that certain state government, particularly if I talk because there is Aam Aadmi Party representative here, Delhi has completely bogged down with the corona crisis management. You cannot generalize the way situation is developing in Delhi across the country. The way the Delhi government is handling private hospital, government hospital people, it is completely messed. They have done complete mess. Certain time they are disallowing this testing laboratories. Then they are saying that hospitals will have to compulsorily go for this testing, filing FIR. Then suddenly coming out with an order that only Delhi people will be getting treated in Delhi. So the mess that Delhi government has created with the hospital people and the whole corona crisis is not the example which has to be emulated to other cities, other states. You have to balance this. So all three issues are there. Certain hospitals are misbehaving. They are overcharging. Definitely there are news. They have to be controlled. The government is stepping in because the hospitals are not regulating themselves. They are overcharging. Therefore, they need to be regulated at this point of time. And even the issues of regarding, and but I also agree with the doctor panelist here that doctors and hospitals are working overtime. They have to be carefully looked into. You cannot generalize. Hospitals and doctors, we have seen they are the coronavirus, corona warriors, because without them, the whole fight will be very much weakened, and they have their families, their personal life, they are putting the whole risk. So you cannot just go
Mr.
on a
Gopal
strict
Agarwal, if I can just
one
come
line.
in here. Mr. Gopal Agarwal, on a lighter note, I sense you fear I will not come back to you on this debate again. You've quickly made all of your points all together. Let's take them one by one. Your first point is yes, there is a need. Some hospitals are breaking the rules or are overcharging, and that must be looked into. In fact, there are also reports, and I want to just highlight this one, because 2 hospitals were fined in Thane for admitting asymptomatic patients. Now, there is the civic body there also believes that they are putting these patients in who don't require much of medical attention, to really reduce the workload and not take on the ones where a lot of medical attention, infrastructure, resources and staff will be required. So they have been fined. But there are instances after instances that are coming out, which is where I want to understand what's going wrong. For example, Akshay Marathe, while
Tanvi,
your app
Tanvi,
will
Tanvi,
show
10
that there are
seconds.
hospitals
Tanvi, 10
available,
seconds.
private hospitals
I
will say
think the
the
model
beds are not
emulated by
available.
Delhi
So
government
is
is not
there okay, but I was giving, okay, so let me ask Akshay Marathe that question. Is there a sense that some hospitals maybe are not forthcoming in providing treatment?
Absolutely, absolutely, which is what I was referring to in my opening line, which is that there are a few black sheep in the industry who are not being forthright. And the reason they're not being forthright is because they do sense an opportunity to black market their beds. And let me give you an example that there is a certain reputed hospital which has been exposed by several channels where they demand for 5 lakh rupees upfront before you actually admit. But when somebody says they don't have 5 lakh rupees, they will tell you they don't have beds available. So I think there is definitely some serious checking of these private hospitals that has to be done, and that we are going to do in the time to come. But we need to create the foundations for a long-term sustainable system. And that foundation has been laid through the Delhi Corona app that you just referred to. Why do I say it's a foundation? Because if you look at what happened in other states, for example, in Mumbai, in Maharashtra, or in Gujarat, what was happening is that you were hearing of the same kind of horror stories that you heard from across the world. But there was no authentic source of information for how many beds are actually occupied and how many are vacant. So what Delhi government has done is that we have made the system transparent and said, this is our platform. We have asked hospitals to declare themselves about their own hospital bed status. So in the first few days, we had a mismatch about the ground reality and what was reflecting on the app. To make up for this mismatch and this disparity, what we have done is now, like I said earlier, we have appointed people to actually sit in these hospitals and ensure that accurate data is collected from the hospitals. So I think that towards a longer term solution, because the fact of the matter is that Corona is not going to go anywhere. So it's not going to be taking action against one hospital or 2 hospitals may solve the problem for the time being, but we are going to have to deal with this pandemic for the next few months. So we have to look at long-term and sustainable solutions, which we are working on through the app, through deploying people in these hospitals. And of course, what we expect to happen in the next few days is, I don't know if your channel has reported on this or not, but in the last 2-3 days, Delhi government has actually sat down with the owners and the administrators of every single private hospital in Delhi and gone through their own rate sheets, and we now plan to put them up for public consumption so that there is complete transparency in the public eye about which hospital charges how much for what kind of treatment. So when a certain patient goes to that hospital, from that point onwards for treatment, and then they are quoted a higher price, we will take the strictest possible action against that hospital for black marketing and profiteering. I think this is the kind of solution that is going to work for Delhi
Okay.
and work for the country as well, I think.
Okay, Dr. Sanjeev Mehta, do you think that is a good way to go ahead? At least step one for the government to actually go through the rate sheets of private hospitals and put them up for so that the people can also access it. So there is at least transparency. Let step one be transparency in the charges that are being, billed to the patients.
Transparency is great, and I think everybody. And I'm a consumer for so many things. I do believe there should be transparency in everything. But I think this whole thing is a little comparison of apples with oranges. Now, we cannot compare the charges of a private hospital with that of a government hospital. I also do not agree with this very harsh rule of putting a cap on a charge without sitting with the hospital and understanding where the charges come from. It's very I don't agree with so many of these things. When you put a charge, are you factoring in the air conditioning of the hospital? Are you factoring in the staff, the security? And I understand nobody should profit here. Let's make it very clear. When I said apples and oranges, what I meant was there are some people who are really profiteering and they should be separately taken to task. But 99% of the private healthcare system is giving its heart and soul for the care of these pandemic. And to paint every private hospital in such a way, I think is injustice. I also want to add, and that's what I was trying to say earlier, that when you cap a charge or cut down charges, I hope you understand that while it sounds very good, please remember you may be in the good people, and 99% of the private hospitals are very, very good. They're giving their heart for it. In that person, if you cap the charge, you may compromise on the PPEs. That puts the doctors at risk. At this moment, there are lots of private doctors who have fallen sick with COVID. Their families are unwell. Our students and our staff have got exposed to COVID. So, I think we need to have a more sophisticated, nuanced approach to this issue rather than a broad, sweeping statement that we are going to put caps. Also, this thing about FIRs to major hospitals who have served society for years, it does put fear. And I think fear causes paralysis. It is not solving the problem. We need to work together.
So,
I
Dr.
think
Mehta,
private
let me
hospitals.
ask you this question. Because you raised this
Yes.
issue, I have been trying to understand this. Yes, the hospitals, when you say the hospitals have been serving people or the nation, I think the medical staff inside those hospitals have been. The management has pretty much been minting money off it. They're making profits. They started it for profit. They got cheap land. They began this business. Now, if they don't follow the rules and the FIR is filed against the hospital management, why are we linking it to burden on the doctors? That nobody is going after any doctor who's working round the clock there and
No,
treating the
you make a
patients.
very good
Everybody
point.
values what those doctors are doing.
No, you make a very good point, and I think there should. That's what I mentioned. There
Tanvi,
should be a nuanced approach. There should be a nuanced approach to it. You need to fine tune it. But most managements are reasonable, are doing a very good job. I mean, I'm sorry, I may take a little different view, but those managements are doing a very good job, and there are charges there. But I think we need to be more, shall I say, soft, nuanced. Sit with the management, sit with the people, and then work it out. Because at any point in time, if there's a compromise on care, then it comes back on the patient and the healthcare system. That was what I was trying to say. And I don't think everybody is out there profiteering. There may
Okay,
be
let me
some
also
people who
say
are,
good e-
there's always a bad apple. But by and large, the bulk of the doctors, in my opinion,
Okay.
of course,
Yes,
I could be
I'm not going
biased.
to make. I agree with you. They're not. These are not to be taken as generic, sweeping statements for everybody in the industry itself. I completely agree with you. But there are many that need to be perhaps reined in. Otherwise, healthcare becomes unaffordable for everybody. Dr. Amrish Satwe, good evening to you. Thank you for speaking with us. The first part of the conversation, Dr. Amrish, for us is the whole debate about the treatment cost and the charges that are being levied, and whether the governments need to step in, cap those prices, or how do we make it more transparent so that it's still affordable? At least in times of a pandemic, it can't simply be about making money.
I completely agree with you. And look, I am not qualified to answer questions on the great possibilities of socialized medicine, but what we have to deal with is the fact that there exists private healthcare in this country, and this is a paid medical service. And I don't think private healthcare should be automatically and axiomatically equated with insatiable greed or avarice. One has to realize that the same kind of treatment in the public sector comes at a fraction of the cost. And that's not because the monetary worth of goods and consumables and services magically and wondrously depreciates in the public sector. It is because the government absorbs these costs. So if at all the government feels the need to cap the price of treatment because a certain section of society is unable to access this healthcare, I think the government should step in and take care of the deficit and bear the burden, because private healthcare is expensive.
Okay. Mr. Gopal Agarwal, do you think that's a better way of doing it? Everybody shares the burden, and perhaps the government steps in times of a pandemic and subsidizes some cost or part of this cost?
The government is already, the structure in the private hospital, the government has already subsidized that they are providing them cheap and sometimes free land. That is the thing. And in this crisis, the hospitals have to come out with the extended help that is required. And I also agree that doctors are, even I have certain reports, some doctors have complained to me that even hospitals management are exploiting even the doctors. So the black sheeps are there, surely. Management are not all professionally doing the work they are required, but I have severe objection to way the Delhi government is handling, or Maharashtra government is handling private hospitals or private establishment. This is not the way to treat them, generalize them, and get the media space by the coming out with certain such kind of bizarre announcements that you will have to do. You have to talk to them, bring them on board, understand their problems, coordinate with them. And in this crisis, if you act the way Delhi or Maharashtra government, particularly Mumbai government is acting, it will further deteriorate the positions. So at this point, majority of doctors and hospitals are going out of their way to help the fight against corona crisis. And I also want to say here that private hospitals are also contributing. This is not the time when you find scapegoat into private hospitals. The facilities or the
No, but when
unpreparedness of
private
certain
hospitals
government
start
is
turning
a
patients
responsibility
away,
of them.
when private hospitals, Mr. Gopal Agarwal, start turning patients away, they know the rules. What conversation has to be done for that? When they start charging exorbitantly, keeping patients back for extra days to get some more money in, what is the conversation there?
So that is the rule of the law will come into force. The government has to address these violations.
Correct.
In any area, wherever there is a public
So that's what the
utility
government is
involved.
doing. But then you are saying they're going after the hospitals.
No. The Delhi government and Maharashtra government in Mumbai are not doing the right way. The way they are doing, they are themselves complicating the matter. They have to be more considerate about the actual ground situation which the hospitals are facing. They have resource constraint. I have seen the problems with their PPE kits and other things. There people working overtime, how much time they can. So you have to understand their problem. You cannot just the way I'm telling you, the government, Delhi government and Mumbai government are not handling the problem in the right way. We have seen other cities. This is not the way to emulate for other states. That's what I want to say. They are not handling it properly. That's the only question. That doesn't mean that there are not private hospitals which are extending their or not doing the right work. There's both things. But you have to, as a government, as a senior person or the more responsible person, you have to handle them in a different way. They are not. They are completely Delhi government and Maharashtra.
Okay. Akshay, do you want
Mumbai
to
government
respond to
are
that before we go to the second aspect of our conversation?
Yes, absolutely. I'm quite shocked by
Akshay, do you
what
want to
BJP
respond to that?
is saying. Because on the one hand, they want us to take action against private hospitals. And when we do take action against private hospitals, they seem to have a problem with it. So BJP is actually very confused right now about which side of the aisle are they on. Are they on the people's side? Are they on the private hospital side? Are they on it's very odd to see them fumble around like that. But at the same time, let me say that I cannot speak for Maharashtra government. I can speak for the Aam Aadmi Party government. You know, we are living in an extraordinary time where the central government's leadership is out campaigning in Bihar. The central government hospitals in Delhi, which have 10,000 beds capacity, are actually utilizing only about 500 or 1,000 beds of that. We are living in a time where out of the 10,000 Delhi government beds, 5,000 have been set aside for corona. So the states are basically left to their own devices in this time of a global pandemic. So I don't expect any kind of support from the BJP at this point. But the least the BJP can do is not nitpick when a
national
state government
resources.
is trying to
Why
do its
Delhi
best
is
to
being spent
give
so much of
manage this
resources?
crisis. The
Infrastructure. Why?
runs,
It is a capital.
BJP runs the municipal corporations of Delhi,
You
which
are
run 20
enjoying you are
in the
enjoying
city,
the free
and
fruits of
one
being
hospital run
capital
by the
and
BJP
not want to
municipal
service the
corporation
people.
are actually serving any corona patients today. I want to ask the BJP, why are they not using their municipal
No,
corporation
you tell
hospitals
us why you have come out
for
with a
corona patients?
notification that
Why don't
nobody
they use
outside Delhi can be admitted to the Delhi hospital. What do you mean by
So
this?
I understand the
You are
BJP is playing
enjoying the resources,
parties,
national resources being the capital of the country.
government
Why
comes
so
to
much of
India.
money being
They are
spent by the central government in Delhi then?
actually running away
You want to
and going to
enjoy the benefits.
their first priority is to win an election in Bihar and not look after the corona pandemic in the country. So please, I want to ask the
We
BJP
talk on the
spokesperson to do
subject,
their
sir.
part
Okay.
and
You
then
talk
challenge
on the
the state
subject,
government.
sir. We will win Bihar election. We will win
I
West
think the
Bengal
point that
election also. That has
That is all
nothing to
that
do with the
is very
corona
no, Mr. Gopal Agrawal, I
fight
think the
with
point
the
that Akshay Marathe is
BJP.
making is that what is it that the MCD hospitals are doing? Why don't they start taking on more patients and start testing patients? That's what Akshay is
So who is
asking.
running Delhi?
and central government.
Is central government running Delhi? You ask him. Why? It is the primary responsibility of the Kejriwal government.
Yeah, but the
They
Aam
should
Aadmi Party is
answer.
not running the
Why
MCD
central government
hospitals
will answer and MCD will answer?
MCD is run by the
Once that
Bharatiya
you
Janata
do
Party.
their duty,
because the MCD.
first you do your duty, then ask questions.
Okay,
We are doing our duty. We are trying our
Okay, let
level
me just
best.
step in here because I don't want this to become a Delhi BJP versus Aam Aadmi Party debate. This is a nationwide
No,
conversation
Tanvi, I
because there is
ask
friction
one
between the
thing:
governments
how they
and
can
hospitals across the
deny
country.
people from
So let's
outside
move on.
coming to
We've
Delhi?
spoken about the private treatment costs. I want to go across to the second point. Now, the second point, and Dr. Ambrish, maybe we can begin with you, and then I will go to the other two doctors as well, is the fact that there is some amount of concern within the hospitals and the medical fraternity that if you don't test all patients before they are taken on, then you are exposing your own staff to COVID infection. That the protocol that has to be followed for COVID patient treatment may need to be followed for other surgeries, but you don't know if that patient is infected. Is there a policy mismatch there? Do all patients who are coming in need to be tested then?
Yes, I think there's overwhelming consensus that all patients who need admission for any ailment in a hospital need to be tested. That is the policy in the NHS in the UK. That has been the policy in North America and practically every other country. And of course, we're worried about healthcare workers getting infected, but we're most worried about other patients who are admitted. Look, anyone who is sick enough to be admitted in a hospital in the middle of a pandemic becomes part of the most vulnerable cohort. And it's our fundamental duty in hospitals to prevent spread of what is known as intramural infection, cross-infection of COVID. So it's absolutely essential that all patients who are admitted to a hospital need to be tested, particularly the surgical cases that are admitted, because now there's evidence in medical literature that if you are operating on a patient who is COVID positive, the chance of mortality is very high, as much as 25%. The chance of pulmonary complications happening in these patients is as high as 50%. Various medical and surgical associations are in the process of writing to the ICMR to try and revise their guidelines to make it mandatory for all hospitals to test on a pre-admission basis so that not only are the other patients in the hospital protected, but we can also reduce post-operative mortality and morbidity.
Dr. Raj Singh, would you agree that this is a large concern? Because as far as we are concerned right now, the ICMR policy, testing policy doesn't mandate tests for all patients. It's only for those who are either direct contacts, high risk contacts, or showing some symptoms.
Well, I agree with Ambaris to a point in the sense that all patients who are seriously ill, who get admitted to the hospital and who are undergoing procedures will have to be tested. Having said that, outpatients who come for other problems need not be tested, and those who may have less severe symptoms and who can be managed at home, we are encouraging them to stay at home in isolation. By and large, the policy is that we have to assume that everyone is potentially a COVID patient and take the necessary precautions. But I would also like to add one thing here in that we are all on the same side, whether it's AAP or BJP or whichever P, or whether it is private hospital or government hospital or patients or doctors, we are all on the same side trying to overcome a major calamity here.
Okay, I understand. Then, Dr. Mehta, what is the way forward? How do we resolve these situations? Because my sense is, and I don't know if any of you, agree and want to speak about it, that a lot of hospitals are in fact also hesitant in taking on patients for this very reason.
Yeah, I completely agree. I completely agree with what Dr. Raj Singh said just now, that in the end, we are all together. And that is what I was saying earlier. We have to have a very fine, soft, balanced approach to this. And that will come only with conversation and taking all partners on board, because all of us are in it together. Either as I could be a patient tomorrow, I'm a doctor today, and I want to work with the government. And I think we all need to work on this in a more, shall I say, finely balanced manner. I want to come back. I hope that answers part of your question. I also want to come back to the earlier question about testing. And I think, again, here, we need to have this a little better teased out. You know, so as Raj said, there are those patients who come in outpatients department, maybe it should be screened and don't need to be tested. But once a patient gets into the hospital, imagine if I'm a patient in the next bed, I'm at risk from the other patient. The patient himself is at risk for higher complications. So I haven't really understood the science behind not testing any patient who's admitted, because then the whole protocol of care would be different. The separation would be different, the isolation would be different, the PPEs would be different. So personally, I haven't understood the science behind not testing everybody. That drives other hospitals to be a little concerned. Now, there is one hospital which I go to, which is treating everybody. And there are one hospital where I go to which has got COVID wards separate from non-COVID wards. Now, in that hospital where it is not COVID hospital, we've been having off and on COVID patients, after which we had to shut down entire wards which were exposed to that patient. Now, if you were to use universal, for example, in HIV, we use universal precautions. That means everybody wears protective equipment, but then we don't have to shut hospitals. Here, if everybody was to wear PPE all the time in every hospital, just imagine the cost that would have to be incurred by the healthcare system and by the country in general
Correct.
to, if we brought, yeah, in universal PPEs. So testing is, I think, a cheaper way. But if there is a science behind it, I would like to know.
I
And
don't
in
know,
the end,
Mr.
let's
Gopal Agarwal, but perhaps this is something that the central government and the ICMR will have to collectively look at after maybe changing this policy, because it is becoming a big concern. And if that becomes a hurdle and an impediment, in hospitals for treating patients, then it will become problematic.
I think there are two, three things which we all have to understand in this thing is ICMR and IMA and the this doctors have and hospitals management etc. They alone can decide what is the correct way, and it should be left to them. The government should not interfere in this process alone. The way some governments are interfering. If there are guidelines by ICMR ultimately everybody has to understand who will regulate what section or what segment. See, ICMR is finally, after discussion with everybody, is coming out with guidelines everybody should follow. Why there has to be a different guideline for different, they have different guideline for different issues. So they should be followed, I think, in letter and spirit and the words. The state government or the central government should only depend on them. What if the doctors have to say anything, IMA has to say anything, they should sit with ICMR and come out with the guidelines that alone can tackle this issue. Otherwise, there will be confusion, different ways, different government will work on them. The government, state government or any government should not be allowed to interfere in the way guidelines, once these guidelines are issued, they have to be followed in letter and spirit. That is the only way that we can move ahead. There may be lapses in them. There may be certain problems in them because nobody knows for sure what will be the way ahead. It's the first time and everybody is trying to come out with the best possible way. But ultimately, knowledge or regulation has to come from the domain knowledge expert only.
Okay, let me also get in a quick word from Akshay Marathe before we wrap up this conversation. Akshay, this is particularly important because in Delhi, of course, now an LG order has, reminded the Delhi government that you cannot just have a policy saying no asymptomatic patients will be tested. But you heard three doctors here and they have a completely different view on what the testing policy should be.
No, the Delhi government stand on this has been made pretty clear for the last few days now. Our only submission on this matter is that every state and including Delhi has a limited capacity to test people. If you have two people, one asymptomatic and one symptomatic, who have to be tested and both are tested at the same time, it will so happen that at some point when we hit the maximum capacity for testing, we will have to make a choice between the asymptomatic person's test
You
and the
should have
symptomatic.
increased the testing capacity. There was ample time.
Mr. Gopal, I have not interrupted you. Please have the courtesy to listen to what I'm saying. So when you have a situation when you do have a limitation in terms of testing, and this is not something that is limited to the state of Delhi, we have a national testing limitation. So we have made this choice very carefully, and therefore when a hospital like Gangaram Hospital was actually in violation of this order, we decided, fine, let's make the entire hospital a COVID hospital, which would solve their particular concerns about testing and about taking in different kinds of patients at the same time. And that is what has happened. But in Delhi's case, certain private labs, certain private hospitals were flouting the ICMR guidelines as well as Delhi government's guidelines. So it's not as if they were flouting a certain state government's guidelines, they were flouting national guidelines. So we owe a responsibility to people who actually need the testing more than certain other people who might be going to get tested for reasons other than immediate emergency medical care. So this is a very difficult choice. It's a dilemma we are in, but we have to.
But you may want to look at what experts are saying right now, Akshay, because I have spoken to a whole host of doctors in the last few days, and there is a growing concern now, for treatment of non-COVID patients. What if any of them are COVID positive? That's a huge risk, especially for surgeons going in. It's going to be a huge risk for them to perform that surgery without knowing what protocol, if they have to follow COVID protocol or non-COVID protocol. Or else we say everybody just follows that protocol, everybody wears the same PPEs, follows the same sanitization and hygiene process that has to be done for COVID patients. That's the difference that needs to be brought in. And I think it's not just the Delhi government, but centrally this perhaps has to be done, or we change the testing policy for all patients coming in. But if this is not resolved, viewers, the end result will be that the hospitals and the doctors will become hesitant in taking on other patients. And that's not something which is good for our country in the long run. Keep in mind, COVID isn't going away tomorrow. COVID is staying here this entire year, maybe next year, until we find a vaccine. And the doctors need to continue with their work. The medical staff, the nurses, attendants, support staff, everybody needs to treat COVID and non-COVID patients. It can't stop. None of this can stop. So we have to collectively look at policies between private, government, hospitals, doctors, public policy experts and governments to ensure that confrontation doesn't happen, collaboration happens. I'm going to thank all of our panelists for joining us. It was a great conversation, a constructive conversation. These are the points that we need to remember. Exorbitant treatment charges are not okay. Yes, the private hospitals should be able to justify their cost, should be able to make some money to ensure that they protect their medical staff. But there needs to be some transparency when you start putting up rate cards for 5 lakh packages for just general beds, not even a ventilator or an ICU bed. There has to be some line drawn somewhere. And if the governments are issuing notices to the management of private hospitals, I don't think the doctors need to take it personally. Nobody's coming after the great medical fraternity that's actually treating patients under so much of burden, working round the clock. Perhaps it is also time to relook at our testing policy. Some of the issues that came about. Thank you so much for joining us on this conversation. Well, let's also get you the latest in the face-off that's building between the Delhi government and the Lieutenant Governor in the centre. Now, Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal, who himself is unwell in isolation and waiting for a COVID test, has hit out. And he has said that treating everyone is going to be challenging, that the Lieutenant Governor's order is a challenge for Delhiites. We will try to provide treatment for all, but it may not be possible. Ayushman is joining me. Ayushman, take our viewers through what's really happened, the back and forth, the fight that's now continuing.
Well, Tanvi, what has happened is Delhi Chief Minister announced that there will be a panel which will decide as to what will happen to the beds of the National Capital Hospital governed by the Delhi government. And the panel gave the recommendation that it should be reserved for Delhi people. That was done. But today, the LG overturned the order and said that it should be available for everyone. Now, what will happen from here, Tanvi, that when we will see a large number of cases, because it is expected, the extrapolation of data has already been given to the Delhi government. And even today, the health minister accepted that by the end of the month, we will see large number of cases because the infection rate is improving. The containment zone in the national capital is improving. What we will see in next coming days, Tanvi, will be the verbal volley between the BJP and Aam Aadmi Party over the LG office, saying the beds, if they would have been allotted to Delhi people, the situation would have been improved. And the BJP will allege that somewhere the Delhi government failed to manage the situation. Right now, the tweet is indicative of that, where clearly Arvind Kejriwal says that it was for the benefit of people of Delhi. So we have seen Manish Sisodia as well, Tanvi, where he has said that LG acted under the pressure of